Welcome to the first video in my 5-part series discussing dialogue in RPG in a Box. Now, normally when I cover a particular topic, I would generally tend to try and fit them into one video, but the problem with the dialogue system in RPG in a Box is there's a lot to talk about. So I decided rather than try and cram it all into one long video and condense all that information into one, I've decided to just focus on specific topics in a little series, and then that way, as we progress through this series, the dialogues will get more and more involved and more progressed. And you can pick and choose which episode you want to watch based on what it is you want to get out of the dialogue editor. Or you can feel free to follow along 1 to 5 and treat this as like a mini course or whatever. Okay, so before we get into things, let me just quickly outline what I'm going to cover in each video. So in this first video, I'm literally just going to introduce the dialogue editor, give a little tour of it. I'm going to explain what the options are and what they do. I'm not necessarily going to create anything in this video. It's going to be more just a discussion of the dialogue editor. I will impart some tips. So if you are familiar with the dialogue editor, do still watch, because hopefully there'll be some tips that you might not know. So, hopefully that will help. In the next video, we'll then start building a very simple dialogue. We'll talk about how to attach dialogue to NPCs, how to get them to start talking. And then we'll introduce the concept of player choices and how you can choose what you say and how that can branch off into different paths. And then in the third video, we'll then start taking a look at conditional checks. So checking, for example, have you spoken to an NPC before? We'll also track player choices so that the things you choose actually affect the dialogue. I'll also introduce the concept called placeholder expression, which basically allows you to have live data inside your dialogues. And then in video 4, we'll then start looking at things like, have you completed a particular quest? Do you have a particular item in your inventory? Have you killed a particular NPC? Those sort of things. We'll create a scenario that covers all of those things in one dialogue so that you can start to see how you can piece these more intricate dialogue files together. And then the very last video, video number 5, what we'll cover is scripting with dialogue in RPG in a Box. So we'll cover, first of all, how to initiate dialogue from a script, the importance of attaching a dialogue to an NPC as opposed to attaching a script to an NPC. And then we'll also talk about how to script a dialogue outside of the dialogue editor. I'll talk about why you might want to do that, the benefits of doing that, and how to go about doing that. Okay, so that's the sort of plan that I have for these 5 videos. And as I say, I'm just going to separate them out so that each video can have its own confined topic, if you will, that we can focus on. So with that said, let's get into talking about the dialogue editor. I'll give you a quick tour of it, talk about all the options that it has, and then we'll then go on to video number 2, which will start building out some dialogue. But before we open up the dialogue editor, I want to impart a very important tip right from the very beginning, and that's this. And I'm probably going to reiterate this throughout the 5 videos because it's so important. Plan your dialogues out first on a piece of paper or something outside of RPG in a Box. And the reason I say that is because the dialogue editor in its current implementation is a little bit clunky when it comes to moving nodes around. So if you decide at some later point that you want to move things around, so you wanted an NPC to say something at a different point in time, or you wanted a conditional check to happen at an earlier point in time or a later point in time, it's very difficult, if not sometimes impossible, to move things around when they're already in place. So it's a really good idea to plan out on a piece of paper where you can sort of make your mistakes and plan things out first, get that all sorted, and then when it gets to the dialogue editor, you can literally just build the dialogue off of the plan that you already have. You can work to that plan. Okay, so that's the most important tip. I'll say this up front, and I may even reiterate it throughout this course because it literally is so important. Plan your dialogue first. Okay, for Most of the dialogue that we're going to be covering in this video, I have planned them. I've printed them out. I'm going to be following the structure that I have. So I'm not going in blind, but some of them, the less important ones, I can build on the fly. But for the most sort of built in-depth ones, I've definitely had to plan them out first, because you want to make those mistakes first outside of RPG in a Box before you make them in the dialogue editor, because otherwise, in some cases, you just can't rectify those mistakes without starting again. So I will demonstrate in the dialogue editor how to work around some of that. If you do need to move things around, I will show you there is a way you can do it, but it's still a bit of work, and it's a bit tedious. So you might find it. Best thing I can say is plan it out ahead of time. It'll just save you so much headache. Anyway, so with that all said, let's start this now by covering the first thing, which is let's take a look at the dialogue editor. So first of all, where is the dialogue editor? It's along the top here, along these options, and you can see it says dialogue editor. So if we click that, let me just refresh that. You'll typically see this screen here. If it's a brand new project with no, if you haven't created any dialogue files yet, you'll be met with this screen. And this will show you any dialogues you have recently been editing. Now, I don't have any. I've cleared them all out. So this is, you will probably see this as well, a blank screen. So let's create our first dialogue. Well, actually, we're not actually going to create a dialogue, but we obviously need to create one so that we can get into the dialogue. So I'm just going to make one called test, or I'll call this one tour, because this is literally just so that I can get to the dialogue editor. So when you click new, you'll obviously be met with this screen, and you give your dialogue a name, you click OK, and then you'll be met with this screen here. Now, what this screen basically is all about is it's asking you which of these 7 options, or nodes as they're actually called, which of these 7 nodes do you want your dialogue to start with, to begin with? Now, when you click one of these options, this screen will go away, and you'll be met with the main dialogue editor window. If you want to later add any of these other nodes, you can find them here in the dialogue tools section on the left-hand side. These same 7 options here are also listed down the left-hand side. So as we're building our dialogue, you'll be able to add these at your own whim as you build out your dialogue. Okay? So before we go any further, let's explain what each of these 7 nodes means and how they sort of work. And then, as I say, as we go throughout the rest of the videos in this brief series, we will cover each of these literally from top to bottom. Okay? So first of all, we have the NPC node. Most of these should be pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just quickly go over them. So the NPC node is basically, if you're talking to an NPC, this is going to be what the NPC says. So an NPC node basically contains all of the text that relates to what the NPC is saying in response to you. Okay. Next, we have the player node. That is what you, the player, say to the NPC. This could either be a single remark, or it could be where your player choices are. So if you have more than one player, node, that results in a choice, and then you can choose, out of however many choices you want for the player to choose from. Okay. Next, we have the message node. This is basically, think of this like a display message, like you have in the script display message. Typically, you would use this in dialogue as the narrator. So this might be you informing the player that something's happened, or how a character reacts to what you've said, something like that. So it's a general sort of descriptive action type things, like, the NPC looks at you in an odd way, or something like that. You'd have that sort of descriptive text. Or it could be you as the game developer talking to the player directly. So an example might be, this dialogue might be a tutorial teaching the player how to play the game. So this might be, you might write in a message node, the shortcut key to, bring up the inventory or something as they learn the game. Again, we'll go through examples of these in all of the videos in this series. Condition nodes are how you check for the state of things. So have you completed a quest? Have you got something in your inventory? Have you killed a particular NPC? Have you got enough money? Have you spoken to this NPC before? All those kind of things. That's going to be your condition checks. It's checking if something is the case. And then depending on if it is or not, you can branch the dialogue down in different paths. Next, we have the script node. This basically allows your script to perform actions. So it might be that, after an NPC says something, an item gets removed from your inventory or an item gets added to your inventory. You might get given a quest, or a quest might complete. The weather might change. An enemy might spawn. Anything you want to have happen as a result of this dialogue happening at a particular point in the dialogue, that's what a script node is used for. So as soon as your dialogue reaches that script node, you can tell it to do something. Okay. Next, we have the go-to node. This is used for sort of jumping around your dialogue. So if you had a choice, for example, that led you down two paths, path A and path B, you could have a go-to node at the end of path A that jumps you back so that you can choose if you want to go down path B without having to recreate at the end of path A a duplicate of the choice so that you can then go down a sort of different path, if that makes sense. So this will probably make more sense when we start putting it into action in an actual scenario. But that's essentially what the go-to node is. It allows you to have branches of your dialogue then jump either back up or jump to completely different parts of the dialogue based on where you tell it to go to at the end of once the dialogue reaches a go-to node. Okay. And then the last one we have, you're probably not going to use this too much, and it certainly doesn't affect the game or how your players will play the game. Comment is just a developer node that just allows you to leave yourself reminders or comments about how you're building out the dialogue. So it might be a reminder that you need to add some more dialogue in relation to this topic, or it might be just leaving yourself a comment about why you're doing a certain thing. So it's purely just developer comments, okay? The players will never see a comment node in the dialogue, okay? So as I say, this window here is just asking you which one of these 7 nodes do you want to start your dialogue with. Typically, you would start with a condition because 90% of dialogues are going to usually be checking for, have you spoken to the NPC before at the very least? But for now, just to keep it simple, we'll click NPC. So as soon as you choose something, this will be then the screen you're met with. And this is the main dialogue editor window, okay? So again, we have the options down the same 7 node options down the left-hand side. So at any point, we can click and drag these in to add them to the dialogue, okay? So if I wanted the NPC to say 2 things, then I can add another NPC node underneath. And then if I want the player to say something after that, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. It's as simple as that, okay? So just to break that down one more time, you just click and drag and you'll see a green line appear. Where that green line is indicates where the node is going to appear when you let go of the mouse. So if I wanted the player to say something first, then I would put it there. So I'd wait until I see the green line appear above the NPC node rather than below it, okay? Whereas if I want the player node to appear underneath, then wait until the green line appears underneath, let go, and that's where the node is going to appear, okay? So let's take a look at the dialogue editor first, and let's go over some of the options. So the buttons along the top, we have create a new file. So this would basically allow you to start a whole new dialogue, which obviously we don't want to do, but you would give it a name and it would present the same choices again. What do you want to start with and all of that. Then we have save. This allows us to save this particular dialogue. May as well do that. Then you have save as if you wanted to save it as a different file name. Undo, redo. So if you've made a mistake or you want to put something back, that's what your undo and redo deal with. And then we have add section. Now I haven't spoken about sections before, so let's take a moment to quickly talk about sections. So you'll notice that when we started this dialogue, this tour dialogue, and I chose the NPC node to start with, it's created at the same time as this NPC node, it's created a section called section 1. So what are sections? The easiest way to think about sections is to think about topics. So when you say to someone, I don't want to talk about this anymore, I want to change topic, can we talk about something else? Then sections are like that. So this, for example, could be a quest topic, and then we can add a section underneath, which is just general chit-chat. So anything related to quest would be in the quest section, and then you put any dialogue that's just to do with general, like, nice to see you again or something like that. That would be in a different topic, or a different section in this case, in your dialogue. Okay, and again, we'll go into examples of how to use sections in the subsequent lessons, but that's what sections are. You can't have nodes without a section. So a section has to exist before you can place nodes. So this NPC node, you'll see it's attached to this section. Okay, so if I collapse the section, you can't see anything, but if I open it up, you can see this NPC node is attached by this blue line to the section. So if I was to delete this section, then everything goes, okay, because you cannot have a node without a section. So it also deletes the node as well. So we'll just put that back, save our script. So hopefully that's explained sections. Obviously, if we add a section, just name it anything, we can delete it as long as it hasn't got anything in it and it's not the only section, then it doesn't obviously delete the whole file. So that's add section. Then we have collapse all and expand all. Now at the moment that's just going to collapse and expand the section, but if we had other things that could be expandable, like player choices and evaluate conditions, you can basically open those all up or collapse them all down all at the same time. Okay, that's what those two buttons do. Then we have the very handy compact all, decompact all. If we place some more nodes down, just so you can see how that plays out a bit more. So here we have a load of nodes, they're all open, but we can click this button here and it collapses them all. They're still visible, but it just shrinks them a bit and just shows the only important information, which is the text that's inside the node. And you can edit that text from here. So we can edit what the NPC says from the actual collapse node as well. But we can also click this button and open them all up so that you can then see them all. Okay, so that's what these two buttons do. They collapse and open out the dialogue nodes. Okay, then we have enable localization. So if you've got multiple languages for your project, then this will allow you to set those different languages for your dialogue. Then we have the settings section. So in relation to the dialogue editor, you can change the line colors, the connection colors. So this is the blue connecting lines here. The pending placement color, this is that green line that appears underneath nodes. So for example, if I made that red and I said OK, and we then added an NPC node, now it's red. So that's what that color is. And then obviously the connecting color, if we made that like a purple or something, that's these lines here. And then the other option we have is compact mode on by default. Usually I would use that because 9 times out of 10, this is the view that I want to have. I very rarely use this view because it takes up so much space. So by having this on, it means that whenever you add a node, it's always going to automatically be, oh, that's interesting. It should automatically be collapsed. Maybe it's just for when you open the dialogue the first time. I'm not sure. That should, let's open it and see what happens. Let's see, if I turn that off and then close it and open it again. No, weird. It should be that when you drag them in, they should automatically be collapsed. So I'm not sure why that's not, this option's not doing it. Or maybe I didn't have it on. That's a good start. Let's save this, close it, open it again, and now try adding a node in. No, I don't know. Your mileage may vary on that option, but typically I would have that on, so I'm not sure why it's not working. But anyway, we'll leave it off since it seems to be not really doing much. But certainly you can make use of these buttons up here. So if you do add something, you can then just quickly click that and, oops, wrong button. You can quickly click the right button and achieve the same result. There is another way to do that, though. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's finish off with the buttons that we have along the top. And then the final one is just full screen mode. So if you want to go full screen into the dialog editor, that can be handy as well, because as you start running out of room, full screen mode can really make a difference because it gets rid of all of these things on the side and everything. Gives you more room. So that's the options along the top. So now let's take a look at, let's expand out the MPC node. And let's take a look at the options that the MPC node has. So these options along the top, most of these nodes have the same options. So let's go through these. So this allows you to, the pencil allows you to edit the ID of the node. So you'll see how this node has an ID of 0001. This one's 02, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So just like entity IDs on the map, where every entity has to have a unique ID, every dialog node has to have a unique ID as well. Now you can rename that ID. So if we didn't want this to be 001, we can change it to greet or something like that. But obviously each of these would have to be unique. So you can't have this one be called greet as well. So if you're going to rename them, you obviously need to make sure that you are still giving them unique names. It's going to be very rare that you're going to really need to rename IDs because it's already going to give you useful ones anyway, which is the number of the node. But where you might use it, for example, is if it's a node where you're going to be referencing it a lot and you just don't want to keep remembering the number, then, you know, let's say this was a really important choice or something, then you can note this down as choice 1, and then you can refer to it as choice 1 in scripts and things. Although it's very unlikely that you're going to use nodes IDs unless you're using a goto, okay, which we'll get to when we get to goto nodes. Next, we have the background image. So if we click that, now I don't actually have any background images, but basically if you did inside your project, this would be a drop-down list. Well, I've got one, I suppose. This would be a drop-down list of all your imported images. So you could import images or create them inside RPG in a Box, and then you can select the one you want to use, and then you can choose how it appears on the screen. Is it tiled? Does it keep its size? All of that kind of stuff. Is it scaled up to fit? All that kind of things. And then basically what that means is when you start this dialogue, that will be in the background. So think about visual novels. If you played games with visual novels before, this is how you would create a visual novel. So instead of seeing the map in the background, if you click this and choose a good sized image, you know, like 1920 by 1080 or something, that will fill up the screen and that will be your background image. And each node can have its own background image. So if you wanted, you know, this to be a background image of the NPC, and then this to be a background image of the player, each node can have its own image that you set. So as you go through the dialogue, the image will change to be the one that's set on that node. Does that make sense? Next, we have the style override. So if you click this, it allows you to basically choose the theme and the style for your dialogue. So these are located in the UI editor. In the themes, we can make a copy, for example, of RPG in a Box, which I've already done. That then allows you access to edit the styles. So we could create a whole new dialogue style where we change the font, we change the color, all of that. And then we can set that this particular node should use that theme and that style. Okay, so that just allows you to, you know, customize the look of your dialogues a bit more. Next, we have each node has its own ability to toggle the compactness just for that node. So here where it does everything, but we can also open out a specific one. So typically what I would do is I'd collapse everything. So it's always this size. And then if I want to edit something, I can just open it out edit it, and then collapse it again. That's typically how I work with the dialogue editor, okay? Because if you have everything open like this, obviously you have to do a lot of scrolling. So let's open this out again. Then we have the delete button, of course. I'm not going to click it because obviously it will delete, but essentially that's how you remove a particular node. So we could delete this one, for example. We could delete the message. Okay, so you can delete nodes that way. So there we have an option that's unique to the NPC node. Initiating NPC is the default. These basically refer to who are you talking, who is the NPC in this case that you're talking to. So the first option, the one that's on by default, and typically you'd very rarely change this, is initiating NPC, which this says NPC who started the dialogue, but that's not strictly speaking true because you might say something first, right? What it actually means is the NPC who you clicked on to initiate this dialogue. So if you clicked on a goblin, then the goblin will be saying this particular node if this is set to initiating NPC, because you clicked on the goblin when you started the dialogue, right? So let's say, for example, you had a dialogue file called, like I've got here, called tour, and I placed that dialogue on 5 different NPCs. One was a goblin, one was a guard, one was a dwarf or something like that, right? You could go around talking to each of the 3 different NPCs, and because this is set to initiating NPC, it will always be that specific NPC. So when you talk to the guard, it will be the guard saying this. When you talk to the goblin, it will be the goblin saying this, etc., etc., etc. The next option we have is Entity ID, and this is where you can actually specify a very specific character. So instead of the previous option where it's sort of dynamic based on who we click on, if we fill in an ID, for example, guard 1, let's say we had an NPC called guard 1, then this particular bit of text here that we write in this node, only this guard is going to say this, even if we're talking to a goblin. So if we click on the goblin, but this node has this entity ID set to it, then let's say the guard was all the way across on the other side of the map, we're still going to get this message pop up from the guard, because we're basically saying it's the guard that should say this, not the person we've clicked on. Does that make sense? So there are a couple of reasons why you might use Entity ID, and we'll go through those over the course of this series. Next, we have Custom Name. Custom Name basically allows this NPC node to be completely disconnected from any existing NPCs that might exist in your project. Because Custom Name basically allows you to just type a name. So I could type Harry, for example, and now this will just be basically a phantom piece of dialogue. It's not connected to anything, but it will just appear as if someone called Harry said this, right? So an example for where you might use this, I've used this a couple of times for when I want inanimate objects to say something, like a magical chair or something like that. So you could have, for example, the name chair as the name, and then you could put, something like that, right? And then that would appear in game like that. Oops, if I type it right. Yeah. So in game, it will appear as chair, don't sit on me. So it's like the chair is saying, don't sit on me. So you're giving a custom name. Now the chair doesn't have to exist. That's the thing. It's because obviously objects and tiles can't talk anyway. But if you, but it doesn't matter with custom name because it's not actually connected to anything. It doesn't have to exist. You're just specifying that I want this bit of dialogue to appear as if this thing is saying it. Okay, so it just puts the name in but doesn't connect it to anything. Okay, and then the next option, custom name color, is pretty much the same as the previous option, but it just allows you to give a color to the name. So let me just check that, got deleted. So if I put chair in here, but I can also change, for example, the color to brown. If it was a wooden chair, for example. And now the text chair will be brown. Okay, this is the text that will be brown, the chair and the colon, okay? But the don't sit on me, that will still be white, okay? So it only affects the name, the color of the name, okay? A custom name color, okay? So that's the options that are unique to an NPC node. Is who's saying this? Is it the person you've clicked on? Is it a specific existing entity? Is it not an entity but just a name? Or is it a name where you want to specify a custom color? It's also worth mentioning at this point, if we quickly open up a character in the voxel editor, we've got a couple of important options here that relate to dialogue. We have their name. We have their name color here. So theme default, or you can set a custom color. So when you specify, when that entity talks, this will be the equivalent of the name color that we set earlier in the dialogue. But this is how you set it for an existing entity, okay? And then we have portrait, which allows you to set an image for this character. So when they talk, that image will appear above the dialogue node. Again, we'll give examples of all of these things in the lessons. And then we have a speaking sound, which you can customize with the sound effects generator, and you can also randomize the pitch to give it a bit of dynamic. You can obviously also have your own dialogue if you want to record, your voice and things. We'll take a look at that when we get to the scripting side of things, because obviously that's not built into the dialogue editor, but you can do that kind of thing if you wish to do that. So we can close that. That was just to show you the options. Let's go back to the dialogue editor. So those are the options that are unique to the NPC node. Next, we have the portrait settings. So character default is use the portrait that we set on the model, like I just showed you earlier when we opened up Base Justin, and I showed you that you're able to create a portrait for that character. So if you have done that, this will basically use that portrait that's set for this character, okay? Or we can say, don't show the portrait, yeah? Or you can say custom, and then that will bring up an image browser of all your possible images, and then you can choose one, okay? So for example, if you wanted a custom portrait where the NPC is angry or something, you could create a variation, and then you choose custom, and then you choose that variation, yeah? That would be one example use for why you might have a custom setting rather than the default, okay? And then we have the position of the portrait. So does it appear to the left of the node, or does it appear to the right of the node? And then the last option is with the portrait, does it appear flipped? Do you flip it horizontally or not? Okay. So those are all the options to do with the NPC node. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. The player dialogue node is mostly the same. Obviously, it's missing the who's talking option because obviously it's the player. It can only ever be one person. It's the player. However, the player node has an option unique to itself, which is the ability to split this particular dialogue into multiple choices. So if I click this, suddenly one node becomes two. And it creates a subcategory called player choices. And it's split, as I say, the single player node into choice 1 and choice 2. Now, it's worth explaining at this point because this is where a lot of people can get sort of stuck here. Now that we've clicked that green button that created this choice, you'll notice that button's gone. So what if I wanted more than two choices? What if I wanted a third choice or a fourth choice? Well, to do that, you simply just drag another player node over the top of the last placed player node. Now, just so we avoid confusion, because that almost suggested it wasn't going to work because of the coloring, let me just go back and put this back to default. Because this is how it would normally appear. Okay, so when you drag a player node over a choice, you'll get this green box appear. Now, it has to go over the last choice. You can notice I can't place it over the first. So I'm going to place it on top of, not underneath, sorry, over the top of the last choice. Okay, so choice 2. As soon as I let go, it then creates a choice 3. And if you wanted a fourth choice, you would drag a player node over choice 3, and that then creates a choice 4. If you wanted a 5, you drag it over choice 4, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So let's close that, delete that. So we're back to 2 choices. Okay, so that's what that button does. It creates a choice, and then if you want to add more choices, just drag the player node over the top. It's also worth mentioning as well, if we delete the choice, you don't have to click the button. You can just drag a player node. Oh, interesting. Okay, you used to be able to drag the player node over the top as well. Oh, I wonder actually, because I think it's actually glitched out. Let me just delete these for a second. You can see it's glitched out because, and this is the reason why you have to be very careful with the dialogue editor, because it's things like this is why you can't move things around, okay, and add things later and stuff like that. So you'll see how these lines are no longer connected, so it's messing up the dialogue editor a bit. So let's delete these and delete that, and we'll just start again. We'll bring a player node in, and I should be able to drag that over the top and let go. So that's another way that you can create choices. You don't have to click this button. And in fact, that button's still there. So if you did it that way, you could also click that button as well to add a third choice. But anyway, so there you go. So that's player choice nodes, or player nodes to be more specific. Okay. Next, we have the message node. There's really not much to go on about here. It's literally just a very simple node that allows you to, as I say, write descriptive text or tutorial stuff. For example, to impart knowledge to the player, either narratively or fourth wall wise, via tips and guides, that kind of thing. But the options are pretty much, it's a pretty simple node, yeah? Then we have the condition node. You'll see that when we create this, it creates 2 paths automatically, a then and an else. And then it has built in a condition by default. And we'll go over what that condition's all about in the lessons. But this basically allows you to choose what the condition is. You can click this button here and build out your condition. And then the then is if this is true. So if this is the case, then this will be the path of dialogue that happens if it's true. And then the else is what dialogue should happen if it's not true. Okay. So as long as something's in a then, this is all the stuff that's going to happen if this is true. Else, this is all the stuff that's going to happen if it's not true. Okay. Then we have script nodes. These allow you to, as I say, have things happen in your scripts. So again, you can change the ID, collapse it, delete it. So options that are unique to the script node. You can obviously edit the quick script. So we can click this and we can type in and drag our script nodes in to build out our script. Quick script basically means you can type this immediately by hand and then use that script. Or if you've got scripts already in the script editor, like for example, my startup script, I can click resource instead. And then this will be a drop-down list of all the scripts you have in your project. I only have one, so that's the only one that's available. But you can then choose a script, and then you'll see your script in here. And this just allows you to write your dialogue script if you want to in the script editor, and then use it in your dialogue, okay? And then the last option is pause until complete. So if it's paused, then let's say we had a player node and an NPC node underneath, then these will not appear until this script is finished, if this option is ticked, because pause until complete basically means pause the dialogue until this script has finished doing whatever it's meant to do. So if there's lots of things that need to happen first, then it will essentially pause your dialogue until that script is finished. If you don't have that ticked, then the dialogue will continue while the script does its thing in the background. Okay? And then next we have, let's delete everything. Next we have the go-to node. This basically allows you to either jump to a node and you would use the ID. So remember each node has an ID. So you would, if let's say we wanted to jump to, it would be a silly example in this case, but let's say we wanted to jump up to ID 002, then we can do that. And now the NPC will say this, and then it will basically repeat itself, because Once it's said this, it will reach this node, it will go back and say it again, back and say it again, back and say it again. So this dialogue would basically never finish. Okay, so that's what goTo node does, but we can also change it to section, and this is how you can change topics. So if we had another section, then we can choose that section, and then at this point in the dialogue, it would then jump out of this section and into a whole new topic. Okay, again, we will go into all of these things in the actual examples. And then comment, let's take a quick look at it. This just allows you to leave yourself a comment like, you know, I must remember to finish this dialogue, or something like that, you know. So it's just literally, as I say, notes that you leave yourself, and you can only collapse it or delete it. Okay, very simple stuff. And this text will not appear either when you're testing your game or when you release it. It's purely just for you to see in the dialogue editor. Okay. So there we go. So that's a tour of the dialogue editor. That's all of the options explained. You can get a preview of your dialogue down the left-hand side. So if we drag a few options in, we do dialogue properties, you can sort of see what's in section 1 and everything. You can get a sort of summary here, but very rarely would you use this window. You typically use the main one. So anyway, that's the dialogue editor in a nutshell. So that brings us to the end of video 1, which was just a tour of the dialogue editor. So with that said, that'll wrap up this video. Stay tuned for the next lesson.